effort that we have projects both within NASA centers and with our partners to perform these critical functions that are part of planetary defense. First of all, starting up in the upper right, we have to find them. We've got to discover what's out there, determine their orbits, and then determine whether they represent an impact hazard to the Earth over time. Then we have efforts that are examining these near-Earth asteroids and comets in closer, more detail, so we understand their physical nature, so that we would know more about what we're dealing with should we find one that's on an impact with the Earth. Then down at the bottom is an area that isn't a lot of funding that goes to it, but a lot of work effort goes here in planning and coordinating both across the U.S. interagency and with our international partners as to what would our response be if we were to find an impact threat. And this exercise actually allows us to exercise some of those processes and capabilities that we would implement if a impact threat were discovered. Then on the lower left, mitigate. These are an area that we do testing and technology development to develop techniques and capabilities that could be used to deflect an asteroid in space. Our recent double asteroid redirection test was the first demonstration of such capabilities. But also here is an area that we work with the emergency response community so that they are adequately prepared if a impact should occur. And then finally, we have to be able to assess our progress and success across these various areas to make sure we're doing the best we can to deal with this potential natural disaster. And with that, let me turn it over to L.A. Lewis to talk about our efforts here with this exercise, the history of our tabletop exercises and the involvement across the interagency in this one.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Lily. Next slide, please. So, FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. We work across the country every day to help people prepare and communities understand and prepare for possible risks. On this slide, what we're talking about, FEMA has a specific role within the Planetary Defense Coordination Office and why I'm assigned there. And cross-agency collaboration on initiatives like a TTX are crucial. So we began our coordination with NASA officially in 2010. But since you can see on the chart, since 2013, we've had a series of exercises that have increased from a level of education, disaster management leadership, to educating state, local, and federal, state, and local interagency partners. In TTX-5, we added an international component to make sure that each level of exercise increased in difficulty, and they concentrated on different things, such as the amount of time it takes to warn for an asteroid impact and what the different challenges are going to be occurring to each level of government. Next slide, please. So in tabletop exercise number 5 in context, the tabletop exercise 4 for comparison, that was held in 2022, as you can see there. We concentrated on a short warning period. It was 6 months. We concentrated on what our actions would be in interagency between the federal, state, and local governments and how they would respond. And in that exercise, we had participation of a municipality here in the United States, along with their local officials. We did it via the internet, so we had a virtual connection with them as we ran our exercise here at APL and Johns Hopkins, but also connected with the local authorities, both at the state and local level, which included all levels, businesses, emergency management personnel, medical personnel. And then tabletop exercise 5, we had basically the same players concentrating more on federal and international partners with a very long lead time. So there were great differences shown between what we had in a 6 month warning period and what we had in a multi-year warning period. Next slide, please. Again, emphasizing the collaborative efforts in these kind of scenarios. Disaster management, emergency response is a team sport. So as you can see on a chart, we have participants from all levels of government, all throughout the interagency, including academia, also international organizations and other space agencies. And this is very important because as we work through these problems, we know it's going to take an international effort, and we concentrate on making sure that everybody's familiar with the plans, familiar with each other, familiar with this type of extreme but very rare scenario so that we can work as a team when the time comes. Next slide, please. Over to you, Lindley.
Okay, thanks, LA. As he said, it takes a lot of effort across agencies to have an adequate response to this type of hazard. And the team that put together this scenario for this exercise is also across several NASA centers, institutions that we work with, and agencies both here in the United States and internationally. And so this chart shows the major players or the major team scenario participants that set up this exercise that we put the interagency through this time. Next slide. So here was a scenario that was created for this exercise. As LA said, it was a longer warning exercise that is actually the most likely scenario that we would face if we're successful in doing our search for the NEO population that we will know years, even decades in advance of a potential impact threat, and therefore have the necessary time to be able to prepare for it. However, even if the warning time is several years to a decade in advance, there are things that need to be immediately done once a impact threat is detected. Now this graphic here in the middle, it shows what at the time of the exercise in this scenario, where the risk corridor was across the Earth's surface, where this hypothetical asteroid could impact. Now, when the time comes, if it hasn't been successfully deflected, it will only impact one point along this risk corridor. But at the time, 14 years, there are still uncertainties in the orbit, and this shows the areas that could be at risk to this impact. Now, when you look at the quick look report, you'll see more detail about this risk corridor and see that there are some major metropolitan areas that lie along this risk corridor track that would be of concern if, as the orbit uncertainties are reduced and narrowed down to a point, would certainly want to be protected. Also, at this time, there are uncertainties about how much of the population could be affected. Now, it's only a 72% chance that it could impact the Earth. It may actually slide past us and not be an impact at all. So there's a chance that there will be no affected population by such an impact. But there also are not insignificant possibilities that a significant number of population centers could be affected. And how much they're affected is dependent upon the size of the asteroid. And at this time, just after discovery, there are still uncertainties in the size of the object, ranging anywhere from 60 meters in size up to 800 meters in size. Now, a 60-meter asteroid impacting somewhere in the middle of the ocean, it would not be that much of a problem. But if it were to impact on land, particularly near a metropolitan area, could be a serious situation. So one of the things we're demonstrating and practicing here is how do we make decisions about what to do given the still existing uncertainties until we know more about the asteroid. So the next slide. As the exercise participants progressed, they developed courses of action that would be presented to the leadership team. And these are the three courses of action that were selected to be presented. Since the asteroid at the time of this exercise was going to go on to the other side of the sun and not be observable from the Earth, it was going to be several months before we would get more data. So, of course, one of the options is wait until it could be observed again. More data can be taken on the asteroid's position, and some uncertainties in its orbit could be reduced or eliminated. So we could wait for that period of time and know more about what the probabilities are after that period of inaccessibility for observing it. But say that after that it's confirmed that the asteroid is on an impact trajectory with the Earth. So this is a period of several months that we could at least be initiating the activities that would give us more information and the kind of information we need to know how to mitigate the asteroid, its size, something about its composition, what its trajectory is going to be. So starting development of a reconnaissance of the asteroid is one of the first things that you'd want to do when you know you have an impact threat. Getting a spacecraft out to it as rapidly as possible to give us that more detailed information and reduce the uncertainty. So doing a flyby mission of the asteroid to get good information about its actual size and composition is another course of action that could be immediately started. Now, there are limitations in what a flyby mission can give you. A really detailed description of the asteroid could only be attained by a spacecraft that actually rendezvous with it and observes it over a period of time. And so a third option, although it takes longer to develop and co-orbit, get it in a correlable position with the asteroid, also takes longer. But that is another course of action that could be taken either independently or in parallel with some of these others. So that's how the scenario played out with the participants. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tarek to talk to us about how the exercise was organized and set up and carried out by the team there at APL.
Thank you so much, Lindley. I'm happy to talk about this exercise. If we'll bring up the next chart, please, to get started. So you've heard now a lot about the scenario that Lindley spoke about and the context of these exercises overall from LA. This specific exercise had 4 objectives. And the first was to raise awareness in the interagency, but also internationally, about the hazards posed by asteroids and comets and some of the complexities associated with responding or preparing to respond to that kind of threat. We're also looking at collaborative international space response. So how would international partners come together to make space missions happen in response to this type of asteroid threat? Disaster preparedness was absolutely a component of this exercise, as was information sharing and public messaging, because ultimately this type of threat will have to bring together space, disaster preparedness, public messaging, and information sharing. Next slide, please. The exercise took place over 2 days, and it brought together a variety of interagency and international partners, as was shown previously. Because we had people participating with all kinds of backgrounds, we wove 3 themes throughout the 2 days of the exercise: international space response, disaster preparedness, and information sharing and public messaging. On the first day, as Lindley alluded to, participants engaged in a variety of facilitated discussions about the scenario and then worked to develop courses of action that would be briefed to senior leaders on the morning of day 2. After that briefing took place, followed by a facilitated discussion about those courses of action, the days then pivoted on towards focusing on public messaging and information sharing and that disaster preparedness component. Next slide, please. So here we're talking about this quick look report that has recently been put out today, but there's going to be a more complete after action report that's released. This is an example of the cover for the report for tabletop exercise number 4 back in 2022. This report will be prepared over the summer time frame, and it's going to contain a detailed set of findings and recommendations to help us learn the lessons that we heard in the 2 days of the exercise to help motivate work in the future and potentially even drive investments to move us towards operational planetary defense capability. Next slide, please. Now, this exercise is the first one that's taken place since NASA's DART mission. DART successfully showed the world that we now have one tested technique to prevent a potential asteroid impact if the need arises. But in order to be able to use a technique like this, we need to know where the asteroids are and when they might pose a hazard. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the NEO Surveyor mission, or Near Earth Object Surveyor. That's a telescope that NASA is developing that will do a planetary defense mission to find the asteroids that may pose a hazard to the Earth. And this mission is currently on track for a launch in the fall of 2027. Back over to you, Charles.
Thank you. With that, I will ask if any of our panelists have additional comments before we move on to questions from the media.
Well, one of the things I'd like to emphasize, Charles, is this was the first time that we had international participation, representatives from other space agencies, and also from the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, which are some of the entities that we work with on a regular basis in looking at this area of planetary defense, and certainly would be involved with us should we have an actual situation that we needed to respond to. It was a U.S. interagency exercise, but we invited in our international partners to simulate that side of the activity that would need to take place.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? None appearing. We will transition to our phone bridge moderator to take questions from the media. If you have not done so already and would like to ask a question, press *1 and you'll be put in the queue. Operator, would you please let us know who is on the line?
Thank you. Our first question comes from Jonathan Seary with Fox News. Your line is open.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. This question is probably for Tarek. In situations where you had to directly intervene, sending a spacecraft to redirect an asteroid, is there a one-size-fits-all spacecraft? In other words, could you repeat DART for any new asteroid threat? Or if you detected a new threat, would you have to custom build a spacecraft based on the asteroid size, composition, momentum, that type of thing? Thank you.
Yeah, so as Lindley showed, in this particular scenario, there was a massive range of possibilities in the asteroid's properties. And that's actually not unexpected when you initially first detect an object. You're going to have a lot of uncertainty. So sending a spacecraft to be able to collect information that reduces those uncertainties would be critical. Every asteroid can be a little bit different, and so you would need to develop a mission that would go to that specific asteroid's location in space. But in terms of the kinds of instruments you would need and things like that, much of that I think would be comparable between different asteroid threats.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question online, please.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Tim Bernhold with Payload Space. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking my question. I had two, if I may. One on the NEO Surveyor mission. You mentioned that was on track for launch in fall of 2027, but it says 2028 on the presentation. Just curious what the timing is on that and how confident we are we're actually going to get that decade-long warning that we need for this. And then just in terms of some of the gaps discussed in the final report, what I think concerns these experts most about our preparedness? What is the top gap that we need to resolve? And just after going through this, how confident do you feel that the world could respond to a threatening asteroid like this? Thanks.
Several questions there. I believe, Lindley, you could take them first and clarify the actual projected launch date from NEO Surveyor first and then move on.
Yes, yeah. The NEO Surveyor project is working to a launch readiness date of fall of 2027. The June 28 date is actually the agency's commitment for a launch no later than June of 2028. So the project is on track for a fall of 27 launch, but we always like to leave a little room to make sure that we can be successful in our objectives. With your second question of what's the largest gap that we feel that we're dealing with, and what can be done to help in that area. Well, currently our largest gap is we don't know the whole population of near-Earth asteroids that are out there, and that's why we're pursuing the NEO Surveyor mission, is to get a more complete catalog of the hazardous population, those asteroids that are large enough that if they were to impact the Earth, they could do significant damage and come close to the Earth over time. But we're working on that with the NEO Surveyor mission, try to close that gap. The second thing that is being worked, and you see it in as part of this exercise, is developing the technologies and the processes for a rapid response capability, reconnaissance capability, so that even though we may have several years, detect the object several years before the impact, we are prepared to get a reconnaissance spacecraft out there as rapidly as possible to give us that critical information that we need if we're going to try to deflect it in space before it could impact.
I'm not sure if there was more to that question, but to ensure everyone has a chance, let's move on to the next question. And if reporters wanted to get back in the queue, they can certainly do so.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Nell Greenfield-Boyce with NPR. Your line is open.
Oh, hey, I hope you all can hear me. This question is for Lindley Johnson. This scenario was a little different in how it was structured. It sort of paused at one moment to look at how these recommendations would be formulated and how they might be received. I wanted to ask you about the role of money. In the quick look report, there's a couple of references to money not being available or Congress not wanting to allocate money until it was a sure risk. I mean, could you talk about that aspect of the exercise and how it's similar or different from past exercises? Thank you.
Well, yes. In this exercise, we wanted to examine the processes by which we would come together, both interagency and internationally, to decide, what is the right course of action given the circumstances. And as we've discussed, getting as rapid a look at a more detailed picture of the asteroid and its physical characteristics is extremely important. But that, of course, takes money. In the normal course of budgeting, that is a very difficult thing to do, is starting new projects, new programs, trying to find the space in the budget given everything else that is being done, to start a new mission. But part of it is doing the right job in informing people, being able to provide them the necessary perception of how serious the threat really is. And so that's part of what this exercise is about, was how do we faithfully inform our leadership and Congress and others about the seriousness of this particular situation, so that their decisions about funding and how to adequately support a response can be made.
Thank you. And again, let me remind the reporters who are online that if you want to ask a question or circle back, press *1 on your phone. And I will now come back to our phone bridge moderator to get the next question.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Marcia Smith with SpacePolicyOnline.com.
Thanks so much. I was wondering if maybe Lindley or any of you could talk about the international response. What is it that the international participants are worried about? Are they worried about how you're all going to coordinate across the globe? Are they worried about their own countries? Where do you see their particular focus?
Well, I'll take it first, Marcia. Over the years, in working through the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs is the secretariat or organizer of, we've built up a pretty good relationship with a lot of the other national space agencies, and have come to understanding between us about how we could respond to such a worldwide threat, and the kind of conversations that need to take place. I think one of the things that we all feel, and certainly our international partners feel, is the importance of it being a international coalition response to such a situation, that one nation, no matter how adequate their space capabilities are, isn't trying to go it alone, that both the capabilities and the concerns of other nations are also taken into account as we craft a worldwide response to a worldwide hazard.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have any comments about that particular question as well before we move on to the next one?
I think from the international disaster response aspect of it, we've talked about this in very broad terms before in previous internationally led a planetary defense conference sponsored by the International Academy of Astronautics. For instance, in 2023, the conference we had in Vienna at the UN, we did begin to discuss what are the international complications for responding on the ground to a large impactor that could affect a very, very significant portion of the Earth, maybe multiple nations. You recall here in the United States, we're all under the National Response Framework, and we all use the National Incident Management System. There's no equivalent system for it internationally. The UN Office of Disaster Response and Affairs, they do have procedures for responding to tsunamis and other big events. But for an asteroid impact, we're thinking the scale of it is going to be such that we actually do need to discuss at this time what it would take for an international response on such a large scale. For us, moving people from state to state or going to stay with your relatives in another state, it's not really a large problem. But if you talk about multiple nations and people having to move around and responding to a very large area, that could be a challenge. So the challenge now is to actually start discussions on, we need to organize and start discussing what would really take to coordinate a large effort and who would be in charge, what organization, how would we set it up? Would it be the UN? Would it be a combination of international organizations? How will we actually accomplish that? So that's the new challenge.
Just one thought is that Lindley and Elliot both addressed, the space missions aspect, the disaster aspect. The international component really wove across the 2 days. And one of the things that struck me was that really at every juncture, there was such a strong support for international collaboration for this international issue. And frankly, I found that as a hopeful, kind of inspiring thing to see that kind of support for collaboration internationally.
Thank you. Let's go back to our online moderator to see the next question, please.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Lizette Ortega with the Washington Post. Your line is open.
Hi, everyone. My question was if maybe you all could give us a bit of insight into the more difficult parts of the exercise. You mentioned that there was a hopeful tone of collaboration, which is amazing to hear, but were there maybe some harder discussions, things that stuck with you?
Thank you. Let's just come down the line. Lindley, would you like to address that first?
Well, I think it's sort of been alluded to already is the decision to act, as we call it, is providing the right information and the right characterization of the situation. That a decision to go do something or not, as the case as the prudent case may be, is one of the things that we always kind of worry about, whether we will be able to gather enough support, coalition, if you will, to go do what needs to be done. In this case, starting the efforts for a reconnaissance of the asteroid, even though we're still 14 years away. But we, in examining how long it takes to pull a mission together, the flight time it takes to get to the asteroid, and the launch windows that are available to get to the asteroid, that eats up a decade of time pretty fast. So that is certainly a concern looking at it from the technological standpoint.
Elliot, do you have any comments on that question about the
Yes,
more
yeah,
challenging
thank you,
aspects?
Charles. Thank you, Charles. One of the more interesting aspects when we really invited our international colleagues this time was, as you saw in this exercise, we've done exercise with 6 months, a lot easier to plan for, 14 years. Well, for emergency managers, disaster responders, 14 years is a long time. So you saw the first thing was wait. Well, we're not waiting because we're not concerned with the situation. It's that emergency managers and disaster responders are working every day. There's always something happening. There's going to be something happening all the way up until impact. So figuring out where to put your resources to start working on this specific problem while still dealing with tornadoes and hurricanes, et cetera, is going to be a particular challenge. And the second part, as I alluded to earlier, was who would be in charge of this effort? How do you get together the international aspect of it? If you have a lot of time, maybe the UN is the right place, but it may not necessarily be under the Office of Space Affairs. So that's the biggest challenge for us right now, is figuring out where that starts, when you start the effort, and what it will take to coordinate such a large effort.
Terry, do you have anything to add?
Just a couple of thoughts. One is that I think the kinds of things that Lindley and Alea have mentioned, I think in the quick look, they really point to the need to have this continual series of exercises, because each one is a learning experience. You take a stab at what communication might look like and what the issues that might come up. You try to frame a discussion there. You learn something as a result, and then you feed forward to the future. You tweak things as you go. So each of these, I think, is a learning experience. both for the planetary defense sort of subject matter experts, as well as for those who are not, living and breathing that field. And this two-way exchange or multidimensional exchange, over time, I think that just helps us move the needle as we kind of trial and error practice how we communicate and convey these issues. To Lindley's point, move us kind of in a direction where appropriate decisions can be made.
Thank you. Do we have another question on the line for our panelists?
Yes, thank you. Our next question comes from Aditi Ramakrishnan with the Associated Press. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you all so much. My question has to do with potential future iterations of this exercise and what they might look like. You mentioned that the previous one was looking more like short warning, perhaps in this one maybe looking at with a little bit more lead time, and I'm curious if there are other scenarios that you either have in mind to potentially explore or things that were learned from this iteration that might be interesting to explore when we're looking at this moving forward.
Well,
absolutely.
Our start, Charles, LA may chime in then. As you said, there's a variety of things that we've exercised, and our exercise scenario team have all kinds of knobs they like to turn and different uncertainties to add into the scenario and areas of different areas on the Earth that could underfall this hazard. So there's potentially an unlimited number of scenarios to exercise here. But what we do is we'll take a look at what are the outcomes, key gaps that are identified in this particular exercise, and then we'll try to craft the next exercise in such a way that it forces us to address some of those outstanding issues and gaps. So we don't have a specific scenario in mind yet, but we'll take the after action report from this one and then begin to talk amongst our community here to determine, so what do we want to take on next time? What area do we need to poke at to improve either the process or the decision making to put ourselves in a better position of readiness. As we like to say in the exercise community, the actual plan, the specific exercise results aren't really anything. It's the actual going through the process of doing the planning and working together, communicating and working with each other. That is the real purpose of these exercises.
Oh, wait, do you have any comments on what next to expect from the tabletop exercises?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. One of the ideas we discussed with our State Department colleagues in the Office of Space Affairs and with some of my colleagues in international disaster response is that we may want to sit down and have a tabletop that is exclusively talks about the disaster response part, because there are other organizations that Lily can tell you about. They have working groups that worked on some of the technical aspects and the space aspects of this particular problem, but we have really concentrated on the disaster aspects of it, not for this specific exercise, this specific scenario. And it's different enough that it will take some effort for us to really sit down as a group and start talking about this specific scenario, an asteroid or comet impact, and start working through the details. Maybe one of the ideas in the future is to have a separate tabletop with just a disaster responder to kind of talk about this specific scenario, because it's so rare and so different that we would maybe need to spend a little bit more time preparing for it. So that's a consideration for the future.
Thank you. Tarek, do you have anything to add to that discussion?
Not at this time.
Fantastic. All right, let's go back and see if our online moderator has any additional questions for the panel.
Yes, thank you. Our next question comes from Tim Bernholz with Payload Space. Your line is open.
Hello again. Thank you for letting me get another bite at the apple. Question, one of the things that a lot of the comments in the report mention are concerns about Congress or political decision-making or time. And I'm curious if any former lawmakers or like non-technical policy people were involved in this, and if that is maybe something you'd like to do in the future. And I'm wondering if you can share any color on like the senior leader briefing module of the exercise. Who is involved in that? What does that scenario look like? Thank you.
Well, that is an interesting idea that maybe we could involve more of the political leadership, congressional staffers, perhaps, or something in a future exercise. But in this particular exercise, though, we did have some senior leaders, both within NASA Space Agency. The Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate was a part of the leadership panel. As LA can tell you, the Deputy Administrator of FEMA participated in the panel. Internationally, we had the Director of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs on that panel. Also, some senior officers in U.S. Space Command participated, and some folks from the White House, the National Security and National Space Council were present. Who else, LA? Who am I forgetting?
I think it's important also, Linda, that we did include some of the science community involved. We also had, for the first time, our representatives from the U.S. Agency for International Development involved in the exercise, which was a great addition, brought us a whole different aspect of what was going on. We had a representative from the U.S. Geological Survey. We tried to get other agencies that would participate that you wouldn't normally think would be involved in this scenario, but they all brought different points of view. And also this time, a big emphasis that maybe Terry could give a few more details on having the communicators, our public affairs officials with us on these exercises, because part of the whole thing is going to be messaging. What do you say? How do you make sure that people believe what we're saying and we don't have issues with so-called incorrect news or fake news or whatever you want to call it, how that would interfere with us moving forward with getting the right things done. So that aspect, I think we are getting better with expanding the population of people. But one of the reasons that we try to keep it more controlled so that we don't go off on a tangent, because I mean, there was a lively discussion talked about what happens when we start doing things on the moon and who's going to be in charge of emergency management, so you can get off on a tangent. So trying to make sure that we have the right people for these exercises is a good way for us to keep moving forward for this scenario.
And LA, just to sort of build on that in terms of discussions and potential tangents, that's one of the reasons it's important to identify these objectives for the exercise pretty early on, and then figure out, who are the people to involve in the exercise to move the discussion on to reach those objectives. You mentioned communications, and it was wonderful to have communications experts from FEMA, from NASA, from other agencies to really clarify, what is it that people would want to know, when would they want to know it, how can we communicate that in an effective way? And going forward, I hope we have more of that, because ultimately if the technical experts can't adequately convey the urgency and the hazard and the potential courses of action, then whatever briefing or information you're giving has a somewhat limited value if it's not driving people towards that action to help them understand what the options are and what they can do in response. So communications, I think, was a critical theme to have, and I think lots of lessons learned on that front.
And we continue it with this briefing.
Yes, indeed.
Excellent point. And in that vein, we have time for one more question. I will ask the phone bridge moderator if we have anyone with a final question for the panel.
Yes, thank you. Our last question comes from Marcia Smith with SpacePolicyOnline.com. Your line is open.
Thanks so much for letting me ask a second question. And it's actually a two-part question, again, about the international aspect of this. And so I'm wondering, Lindley, if you have any update on efforts to try and get a spacecraft to Apophis before it gets here. I know that NASA has funding challenges to do that, but is there any indication that the international community is going to come together and find a way to do that? And secondly, I know that you are now the Planetary Defense Officer Emeritus. You were the first one, and I'm curious, do other countries have their own planetary defense officers now? And if so, are they all in space agencies or in other parts of the government?
Well, a couple of questions there are sort of off topic, Marshall, but to the first one, yes, our talks with other national space agencies and around the community are yielding some results. The European Space Agency is very active in initiating a Apophis reconnaissance mission, pre-Earth encounter reconnaissance mission. Now, here at NASA, we have approved a extended mission for the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft because it can reach the Apophis asteroid shortly after the closest approach to the Earth. And so a post-close encounter characterization of the asteroid is very much in hand with the OSIRIS Apex mission. But both for scientific purposes and for demonstration of planetary defense capabilities, we want to be able to get a spacecraft out there weeks to months to get a look at Apophis before that close encounter with the Earth, because first of all, it demonstrates the capability to do that for planetary defense, but also gives the scientists the before picture of asteroid Apophis, so that we can see what changes were made by the close encounter with the Earth. But European Space Agency is pursuing a mission that would be a rebuild of the Hera spacecraft. The Hera spacecraft, ESA is getting prepared to launch it this fall to go back to Didymos to do a post-DART assessment of the Didymos system. So that was the most capable way of them providing a Apophis reconnaissance mission. So this mission called Ramses is being pursued, and they've invited international participation to that mission. U.S., JAXA, Japanese Space Agency are definitely partners in that. Here at NASA, we're continuing to look at possibly a repurpose of the Janus spacecraft, the Simplex mission that didn't get to go on a ride with Psyche. And there are other countries as well, particularly the Korean Space Agency that is looking at what kind of mission they might be able to do, albeit a small spacecraft or something like that. But it all demonstrates this idea of a rapid reconnaissance demonstration. Back to the question of planetary defense officer. Yeah, I'm starting my phasing into retirement. Kelly Fast is now the acting planetary defense officer here at NASA, and but yes, there are planetary defense officers now. The European Space Agency has their own planetary defense program, which they have under their space safety program. And the Japanese Space Agency is now in the process of setting up a planetary defense office amongst their small body science efforts. So, so although there's not too many other planetary defense officers yet, I would expect about every space agency in the future will probably have somebody that has that at least as an additional duty.
Okay. Well, that is about all the time we have today. If some of the journalists watching or online have additional questions, you can contact us directly. The associated news release is available at nasa.gov/news. Thank you so much for joining us. Also, the Quick Look report is published and can be found at nasa.gov/reports. Go planetary defense.